Greetings, ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to a review of this machine, the Chinese Tier 7 heavy tank, the IS-2. Now, many of you may have looked at the Chinese tech tree and noticed that a lot of the vehicles bear a striking resemblance to a variety of vehicles in the Russian tech tree, and that's very simply, or among some others, but the Russian tech tree in particular, and that's very simply because early Chinese tank development essentially involved buying tanks from other nations and making small modifications to them. So if we have a look at the tech tree, the lower tier machines, so tiers 1 to 4, are vehicles that have been acquired from other nations. So we've got the NC-31, which is a Chinese version of the Renault FT tankette. The VAE Type B, which is the Vickers, British Vickers machine that the British Army never actually used and was sold overseas a lot. The Chiha, which is a captured version of a Japanese tank and was redesignated from the original Japanese classification of a medium tank to a light tank. And then you have the Stuart, which is a vehicle that the Chinese acquired from the Americans. At Tier 5, you've got the Type T-34, which is essentially a Russian T-34, and there's very little difference between the two. You then have the Type 58 at Tier 6, which is essentially a Russian T-34-85. Again, there's very little difference between the two. There is a bit of difference, though, but not a vast amount. And then you finally get to the IS-2, which is essentially a Chinese IS. Now, it's worth actually noting the name is a little bit of a misnomer, because the Russian IS tank, as it appears in the game, it actually kind of squidges together the IS and the IS-2 depending on what configuration you use. So the IS generally came with a 100mm gun to defeat the Tiger tank and the Tiger II, and I guess it should technically be JS, but IS stands for Joseph Stalin. Not that he was an egomaniac or anything. And if you have the the IS in its top configuration, you've basically got an IS-2 with the 122mm gun. And so this IS-2 designation is a little bit of a misnomer, but nonetheless, this is a tank that the Chinese acquired from the Russians, so expect the two machines, to be very, very similar, and they are very, very similar. However, there are some differences. Now, I'm not going to make comparisons between the two right the way throughout this video, because I think it's worth treating every machine as a tank in its own right, and so I'm not just going to give you a constant comparison with the IS, and maybe not everyone's played the IS. Certainly, I actually played the IS-2 before I played the IS. Anyway, what do we have? So fully upgraded, we've got 1,280 hit points, which for a Tier 7 heavy tank is pretty much par for the course. It's not as much as the Tigers or the Black Prince, but you know, it's similar to it's a bit more than the AMX. It's similar to the T29, I think. Let's just have a look at the T29. How much does that have? 1250. So it's a very similar sort of range to the T29. The KV3, well, 1300, but this is stock configuration, but even then it's more. The IS, 1230s. It's all very, very similar. Sorry, excuse me. Sorry about that. It's a 46-ton tank. With a 700. Sorry, I'm looking at the IS now. I do apologise. It's a 46-ton tank with a 580 horsepower engine. Now, comparison with the IS time, that is a less powerful engine, making the power-to-weight ratio of this tank a little bit weedy. However, Wargaming have given this tank better ground resistance, and so the net result is that you don't really actually notice the difference in engine performance. I guess you might notice it if you're just climbing a hill, but apart from that, this is a fairly mobile heavy tank. Top speed of 37 kilometers an hour, a traverse speed of 38, which for a heavy tank is pretty nice. Now the armour, I'll talk about the armour in more detail later. But number-wise, 90 on the front of the hull, 90 on the side, 60 on the rear. Turret, 100, 90, 90. This is one of those tanks where looking at the armour thickness does not tell the whole story. There is angling and rounding to take into consideration, and as I say, I will talk about this in more detail later, but what you should probably take away from it now is that this is not the most heavily armoured Tier 7 heavy tank, but the armour is good enough Certainly when combined with the mobility and the firepower, the armour is good enough to reliably to bounce quite a few shots, depending on your opponent. I will talk about the gun in just a moment. Turret traverse speed 28, which is fine for a heavy tank. View range of 350 meters, which is a bit on the low side, let's be honest. These sort of Russian-style tanks at mid-tiers are not renowned for their ridiculously good view range, and a signal range of 600 meters, which is alright, but radios never really make anybody that excited. So what about the guns? Well, there's a whole variety of... I say a whole variety, there's 3 guns to choose from, and again I'm going to make the comparison. If you've played the IS, you'll notice this is a common trait with a lot of the Chinese tanks. They're like the Russian tanks, but with quicker upgrades. So for example, if you play the IS, your stock gun is something like an 85mm gun or something like that. You get a 100, 122, etc, etc. This tank, stock gun, is a 100mm gun. So, 3 guns on this tank. Stock gun and 2 122mm. So essentially, stock gun here is not... It's not a really painful stock gun. 6.45 rate of fire, 175 pen, 250 alpha damage, 0.42 dispersion, 2.9 seconds aim time. It's a bit terpy, the DPM isn't particularly good, the alpha damage isn't particularly good, but the gun's good enough so that the stock grind on this tank is not that painful. But you're not going to use this gun any longer than you have to, let's be honest. But as I say, it's not that much of a painful grind for you to get through. So you'll only play this until you have access to one of the 122mm weapons, and the first one of those you get access to is this, the 122mm 35 122 JT. It's a 122mm gun. Rate of fire is not great. 175 penetration is alright. 390 alpha damage, lovely. 0.48 dispersion, kinda bad. 3.4 second aim time, atrocious. You're only going to use this gun long enough until you have unlocked the top gun, which is here, which basically gives you a buff to your rate of fire, slight buff to your accuracy. That's what you get. Now, one thing that is worth noting here, Chinese 122mm guns. The big difference between the Chinese 122s and the Russian at mid-tiers fire APCR as their premium ammunition type. The Chinese fire heat. This means the Russian premium ammunition gets higher shell velocity, does not get eaten by your opponent's tracks and any spaced armor all the damn time, but has 217 penetration. The Chinese heat ammunition, lower shell velocity, gets eaten by tracks and spaced armor all the time, but 250 penetration. Apart from that, the guns are basically the same. You roll around, derp someone in the face for 390 average damage, and roll back around the corner. It's not exactly a complex playstyle, and this is not a complex tank. This is a tank that rushes, gets in your opponent's face, and beats the ever-living snot out of them at point-blank range. You know, this is not a sniping weapon, it's inaccurate, it takes a long time to aim. It doesn't have particularly high DPM, but it does have the alpha damage, which is quite nice. One thing I should note about this tank, it has 5 degrees of gun depression, which is something you should get used to on these sort of Russian-style heavy tanks. And I think that's about 5 degrees of gun depression is something that continues up the Chinese heavy tank line. And this is sort of in the style of how a lot of the Chinese heavies are going to be. They tend to be relatively mobile and mount pretty punchy guns, with enough armor to bounce some shots and stay alive. So that's the gun. Talked about the mobility, which is pretty respectable. What about the grind? Well, let's have a look at the previous part of the tech tree. The thing with this is that the Chinese start off with one tank line, and so this means that you get a bit of a hodgepodge of different vehicle types. And so you're probably going to find that if you're aiming to go down the Chinese heavy line, I mean, you're going to have to start off with a light tank crew, another light tank, medium tank, and then turn into a heavy tank. It's a bit of a faff. But, you know, I mean, these don't take long to get through at lower tiers. The NC-31 is tier 1, who cares? The VAE Type B, I didn't like it, but if you like the British pom-pom guns, you might enjoy it. Chiha has a relatively good gun, but it's a sluggish light tank. It's not particularly special. I had a lot of fun in the M5A1 Stuart. It gets a fairly respectable 45mm gun. And of course tier 4 light tank matchmaking, so that can catch people out a little bit. Type T-34, well, it's basically like the Russian T-34. I had fun in mine. I think it's a pretty decent tank. Ditto applies for the Type 58. And as for the IS-2 itself, well, as I've already mentioned, it's not exactly the most painful stock grind in the world. So gun-wise, you will have the 100mm gun, and you do not need to unlock the top turret before you mount the other guns, if you've had relish to unlock them. So what is the stock configuration like? Well, it looks like 100mm gun. This radio you will have from the Type 58. The top radio you will not have from the Type 58. So you can mount that radio. Engines, yep, you will have that engine from the Type 58. You will not, however, have this engine. So stock configuration is middle engine, middle radio, 100mm gun. I would prioritise getting a 122mm gun as soon as you can. Just that first one will do. Because while this gun, the 100mm, is not a terrible gun for grinding with, I don't think it's really a great gun for this tank. And it certainly doesn't bring out the best in this machine. Once you've got hold of that, concentrate on the engine, then the top gun, then the top turret, then the top radio, and the suspension whenever you have to buy it in order to fit everything. Now you could say, oh, I don't need this gun and this turret on this tank, and that's true, but the top turret gives you a little bit more health, and that's about it. Oh, and it probably gives you better stats on the guns, to be fair, so I do recommend this top turret. As for the top gun, well, you're going to need to unlock that top gun on the 110 anyway, so you might as well save yourself some pain and do it a tier earlier. So I do recommend unlocking all of the guns and the top turret on this tank. Now the Chinese tech tree really does benefit from cross-pollination, i.e. if you've played one tech line, it makes playing the other tech lines a lot easier. And this is particularly true when you consider the WZ-120 and the T-34-2, the Russian tier 9 and 8 respectively, I guess, medium tanks. These machines really benefit from having unlocked other modules on tanks from other lines. So my recommendation, if you're interested in the Chinese tanks at all, my recommendation is to leave the medium line until last. Heavy line and lights up to tier 8 will unlock a lot of the modules on the medium line for you. So that would be my recommendation. Leave the medium line until last. I mean, once you've unlocked the stock gun on the IS-2, that's given you the top gun on the T-34-1. Just for example, the T-34-1 uses this 100mm gun. So, yeah, this is not a particularly painful grind, and when it's fully upgraded, you have a pretty decent tank. Not without its drawbacks. It's not a sniping machine, but you have a pretty decent tank. So, what about equipment and whatnot? Well, firstly, ammunition loadout. With 175 penetration and a kind of derpy gun, you can have problems in tier 9 games penetrating people. Now, this is made up for a little bit by this tank's relatively good mobility, and you can compensate by firing heat ammunition with 250 average penetration, but the heat ammunition is very expensive. I apparently have a load of this ammo in my garage. Oh, yes, I do. I remember why. Because this gun is also used on the T-34-2, and I tried this gun out on that tank, but hated it. Anyway, so yeah, I've got 22 rounds of AP, 4 rounds of heat, and 2 rounds of HE. I don't think I've ever fired a heat round out of this tank, though. So, make of that what you will. Equipment, well, consumables, I just have the standard 3 consumables. Obviously, you want a small repair kit. I would recommend fire extinguisher and a small first aid kit. What else could you take? I guess you could take improved combat rations if you really wanted to. Automatic fire extinguisher would be an option. Quality oil? No, I wouldn't bother, to be honest. And equipment, well, if you wanted equipment for this tank, I would recommend a gun rammer to get your reload down, I would recommend, where's it gone? Improved vents, just all round improve your machine. And can this thing fit a vertical stabilizer? No, it cannot. Therefore, I would recommend an enhanced gun laying drive to improve your aim time. I just use the standard grinding equipment on this machine. Crew skills, well, Sixth Sense is always a good idea to have on your commander, although they are talking about changing Sixth Sense at some point, but never mind for now. Sixth Sense on your commander. Chinese tanks do have an irritating habit of setting on fire, so I would recommend preventative maintenance on your driver. Safe stowage is a good idea on the loader, although I didn't have the ammo rack problems with this machine that I have had on the IS. I don't know if that's indicative of an actual difference between the two or just my own impression. Repairs on the gunner is fine. Now you could argue you should have more of these crew with repairs, but I wanted to have preventative maintenance and safe stowage as soon as possible. I carry a toolbox on my I carried a toolbox on my IS-2 anyway, which buffed my repair speed, so I could put my tracks mainly back on faster anyway. So it wasn't that much of an issue for me. But Sixth Sense and some combination of repairs and useful skills like preventative maintenance and safe stowage to stop you just dying. So I've prattled on long enough. Let's go and take a quick look at the armour scheme and then we'll jump into some games. Okay, let's talk about the armour on this tank. So, firstly, rear armour is bad. Rear of the hull, it's going to be 70 odd millimeters effective. It's going to be penetrated by whatever looks at it. Rear of the turret is 90. You might find it useful if you're in a lower tier light tank to know that this machine gun port on the back of the turret, like the IS series of tanks, is actually a weak spot. So that is effectively 80-85 millimeters of penetration required to punch through that. Side armour is 90 on the hull and the turret, which means combined with these tracks, put some nice angling on that and you can get some decent armour values, but we'll get onto that in just a second. Front of the tank. Right, let's talk about the turret first. This thing only has 5 degrees of gun depression, so going hull down is not exactly the most viable option available to you. You also don't necessarily want to go hull down because the turret isn't amazing. So, the sides here, you've got side turret armour, but it's angled such that it's basically an auto bounce zone. You've also of course got this big weak spot up here that's the commander's hatch, and it is quite large if you look at it. And again, that's 90 millimeters thick, so a good solid shot should go through that. Either side of the gun, you've got these sort of cheek regions, which as you look straight at the tank from the front, on the right hand side, you are into auto bounce territory or relatively good armor values. On the left hand side, however, if you can get it right where it's flat, you can go through that with 100-110 millimeters of average penetration. It's really quite thin and not well angled. Just above the gun here, we're looking at 200 millimeters or an auto bounce zone. Base of the turret here, if you can sneak a shot in, yeah, sure. Gun mantlet's pretty good, although around the gun there is a hole. But the gun mantlet's pretty good. Basically, the turret's kind of a bit RNG based. Will you, won't you? Who knows? Front of the hull. Well, the lower plate's 100 millimeters thick, so if you're looking at it straight on from close range, you're looking at effectively about 130 millimeters of pen required to go through that. The upper plate, however, is only 90 millimeters thick, but because of the angling you've got going on here, actually most of the time it's effectively more than that. And so really reliable pens on the front of the IS-2 are not trivial. If you put some angling on this thing, then you can start getting silly values, like you're up to 160 odd armor on the front, 180, oh no, let's angle that a bit more, 130, 140 on the sides, auto bounce toward the rear, 140 there. I mean, you can start bouncing shots fairly effectively, which you will see in one of the up-and-coming replays. And compared to the IS, in terms of armour, this tank is a little bouncier, because while this plate is not as thick as the IS is 120 millimeters, the better angling and better sloping on it means that it's easier to bounce shots with the IS-2. So, that's the armour scheme. Let's go and have a quick look at some gameplay. Here is game number 1. So we are top tier here. I'm platooned up with Blaze and Wagged again. Blaze is in his Panther, Wagged's in his A44. We're here on Ruinberg, and it's an encounter game. Now, I'm thinking at the beginning, what to do. I don't really want to go to the little village on the side. I don't really want to go to the little village on the side, because that sort of side of the map tends to favour gun depression. I could go through the city with all the other heavies, but I think that's a little bit predictable. So I decide to go for option C, which is pretend that I'm a medium tank. And between our platoon, we're not on TeamSpeak or voice comms or anything, so we're just insulting each other. So yeah, I'm going to pretend I'm a medium tank because the IS-2 is relatively mobile. And here we go, here's a shot I have absolutely no right to hit. Now if I'm going to complain, that was pretty much a minimum damage roll. But I shouldn't have hit it anyway, and Wagged polishes the guy off, so screw it. Feel so sorry for that M7. Sorry dude. But this is somewhere that I would usually, if I was spawning on the top side, take a medium tank. I'm not a medium tank, I'm a top tier heavy, but the IS-2 is relatively mobile, and an IS-2 in this position is going to give the enemy team significant problems. And shot into the side of that T-29, alas, it appears to bounce. It looked like it might have gone a bit high and bounced off the front of his turret. It happens, the accuracy on this gun is pretty bad. But and that one also misses. I have my fair share of misses at the beginning, but you can also see we bounced a shot there, which was nice. And the frontal armour on the IS-2, as I mentioned, it's actually, in practice, pretty darn good. We put a nice big hit into that SU-152. It was a low damage roll, you know. One would have expected that most of the time I probably would have killed that SU with that shot, but, you know, not going to whinge too much about it. Blaze takes out that T1 heavy. So the current score stands at 2 kills apiece, and it's our platoon on our team that has got the 2 kills so far. T29 is moving across. I take another bounce there. I'm going to see if I can put a shot into his side. T29 is looking at me, so I really don't aim that one very well, and my shot misses, but I don't take a shot in return. Alas, Wagged in his A44 gets taken out by a KV-1, so well done to that KV-1 for killing himself a tier 7 medium. T29 misses his shot. I try and take time to aim mine, and we put it straight through the wall, straight through the front of his hull for a nice average 390 damage roll. Our artillery takes out that T-43, Panther M10 kills their Sherman, we lose a VK, leaving the scores tied at 4 kills apiece, but there are certainly a couple of tanks on their team, and probably our team as well, that are on rather low health. Like that T-29, who is probably not feeling so brave anymore. And we've got a Hellcat up there who's asking for help. There's that SU from earlier on. Ow! T-29 puts a shot into the front of me, so well done to him. I've got a Churchill gun carrier here, who I feel so very sorry for 2 reasons. One, he's using a Churchill gun carrier, which is a terrible, terrible travesty of a machine. And 2, he's clearly not got the top gun. I think that might be the second gun, because he managed to get a kill with it, so it can't be the stock gun, because the stock gun is woeful. And at this point I decide this fight is not playing to my strengths. My gun is not very accurate, and they're not giving me large targets to shoot at. Having said that, T-23 E3. For those of you that are wondering, what the hell is this tank? Oh, he gets tracked. That tank is was a Clan Wars gift tank. It used to be in the game as the American tier 7, 8 medium tank. It basically got replaced with the Purging, replaced by the Purging, and it is now, well, it was a reward for a Clan Wars event. So, shot into the side of this M6. Hello, Mr. M6. Bye bye, Mr. M6. I say the side, it ended up going through his front. And that's kill number 2. And in a moment, you are going to see the utter brutality that is the IS-2. Finish off that KV-1S. We're winning 9 kills to 7, and that Hellcat dies, and I decide, screw it, I want some more damage from this game. So, let's drive forward and kill the rest of the enemy team. Their T-29 is out on the field, I know that, so I'm not too worried about him. There's a T-20 over here. Oh, KV-1, right. KV-1 versus IS-2.
This isn't even funny. The KV-1 is so horribly outgunned and out-armoured, it is ridiculous. It also doesn't look like... Well, no, maybe this guy is trying to hit my commander's hatch. But he'd probably be much better served trying to hit my lower front plate. But there we go. Sucks to be him. He is, however, hiding himself very well behind the wreck of that Panther. Which is kind of irritating, because there's a T-20 behind me, so I get lucky and bounce that shot. And now I accept that I might take a shot in the bum from that KV-1, but I do not want a T-20 shooting me in the backside. So I put a shot into the T-20, and now I bounce one from the front and the rear. I'm just going to bully this guy. There we go, nudge, and second shot into him, angle my tank, and I can reliably bounce 160mm of penetration from that 90mm gun with my tank when it's angled like that. And good night, sweet prince. There we go. That's the brutality that is the IS-2. And oh, the KV-1 it looked like was coming up to try and help his friend. That's very sweet. Oh well. And that's the game. There we go. That ended up being a little bit of a brutal drubbing, especially when I took the IS-2 into the town and just completely kicked the T-20 and the KV-1 in the face, and they, well, they didn't really stand much of a chance. I managed to turn it into 2 one-on-one fights, from which they were never going to do all that well. Sorry guys, there we go. KV-2, sorry, not KV-2, IS-2. In its element, up close, personal, in your face, where it doesn't have to really aim that gun too much, and where its armour works, bouncing shots and keeping you alive. So, that was the top tier game. Have a look at the post-battle results, and then we're going to switch to a bottom tier game. Here is game number 2. So, as I promised, this is a game where we are bottom tier. This is a tier 9 game. We're here on Ensk. Ensk is a small map, so engagements tend to be short, brutal, and at close range, which is how the IS-2 likes its engagements, but bottom tier. Now, I've heard a lot of people say before that the IS, and I guess by extension the IS-2, doesn't do very well when it's bottom tier. I'm not entirely sure that I agree. You have a gun that has respectable penetration, good alpha damage, so you're going to hit hard. You're, you know, relatively mobile. And I think all this means that, providing you don't try and snipe, this is not a sniping gun, and providing you're careful with your engagements, you can still do very well indeed when you are bottom tier, which hopefully I'm going to demonstrate in this game. So, initially, I should also say this is encounter. On encounter, I like to push down the field side of the railway tracks and then flank around. Initially we're just trying to see if we can get any shots down that little alley thing, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. Instead, there's an AMX 1390. I try and see if I can get any fire onto him. Indeed I can, and that 1390 says goodbye and disappears in a rain of shellfire. There's also a Centurion Mark 7 over there. And I decide to have a blind shot, but I really shouldn't have done because there's a Super Pershing that I could have shot at. Oh, well, never mind. We're up 2 kills to 1, as we've also claimed a Tiger in addition to that AMX. KB5 is moving forward, and so I'm going to see if I can give him any support, but hello. Remember that Centurion from earlier on? Well, there he is, and there's also that Super Pershing. Hopefully I can get a shot on one of them. Alas, the Super Pershing appears to have his spider sense correctly installed. There's the side of the Super Pershing's turret, which would be a lovely shot, but alas, we can't make it. However, side of a Centurion, yes please, and it looked like I tracked him into the bargain, which was nice. Aiming for weak spots like that, or aiming for bits of the enemy tank that can get you an advantage, like the tracks, with this gun can be a bit of a mugs game, because you're not accurate enough to reliably hit them. And so a lot of the time at range, anything other than point blank range, you really more want to be aiming for centre of mass. Leopard. Oh, I take a snapshot there. I really want to close the distance here because, as I mentioned, not a long-range tank, and Leopard prototype can be very, very good at longer range engagements. But his armour is also complete garbage. So I'm going to feast on his tasty, tasty health. Now the Leopard appears to be pushing through, which is terribly unsporting of him because I want another shot. And I wait for this to aim a little bit too long. I should have taken that shot earlier, but, you know. There we go, mistakes were made. Let's not worry about it too much. As you can see, our team is winning 5-0. Well, 5-1 now, but winning fairly convincingly. There's an IS-2 over there, and the reason I was trying to take that shot in third person is because it's through a fence. That was the logic. So, 8-1, and we are now very much at the stage of the game where I am thinking, holy crap, this team is doing well. I need to try and squeeze in some damage before the game's over. There's the Leopard. We put another shot into his bum, and he's dead. Now, the enemy are capping. What tanks do they have left? Panther, KV-2, Jagdpanther 2, Centurion, E-75, Conqueror. The only one of those that's really going to give me any problems armour-wise is the E-75. Put a shot into that Panther, set him on fire, but he clearly has an automatic fire extinguisher, although he also appears to be AFK. So that seemed like a bit of a waste. Oh well. They are capping, but they're never going to cap this out. It's just not going to happen. And we all descend upon them. Ooh, that Object 430 just took a whole world of pain. Right. Concentrate on the soft, squishy targets. Your gun lacks penetration and accuracy, so concentrate on those targets that you think you can pen. And I do not want to have a shooting match with a Conqueror. That's just not an engagement I'm really going to win. But, side armour of a Conqueror? Oh, yes please. Alas, the shot doesn't go where I aim it, and it hits his upper front plate instead. And the Conqueror's upper front plate is perfectly capable of bouncing that, but Patton finishes him off. There's only two of them left now, Centurion and an E-75. And the Centurion's goose is well and truly cooked. Oh, someone gets the kill before my shell lands, and now there's an E-75. And these guys are all low health, so they're playing prancy prancy, prissy prissy, don't want to take the hit. About going around the corner. I, however, don't care. I'm on full health, and I'm a bottom tier tank, so if he wants to shoot me, he's more than welcome. I take a shot there, which manages to go through him, and really here I should probably be loading heat ammo, because the side armour on the E-75 is perfectly capable of bouncing my 175mm of average penetration. Side of the turret bounces. I was trying to stay behind this guy, but he was having none of it. And he's reversing himself into a position from which he is relatively strong. Managed to put that shot through the side of his armour, however. He's got 103 health remaining, and he's dead. And that was the game. So we didn't actually pick up any kills, but we were important in that game. We did a good amount of damage. We actually got top XP in that game, and we came around that corner so that we took the hit, meaning other people didn't have to, because I had the health to play with. I was on full health at that point. So that was what this thing can do when it's bottom tier, and I don't expect it to do that all of the time, but it can do well when it's bottom tier. So let's just quickly nip back to the garage for a bit of a roundup after you've had a look at the post-battle results.
What's my impression of this machine overall? It's not bad. In fact, okay, now I'm going to make the comparison with the IS. The two are very similar machines. The main ways in which they differ. One, mobility. The IS has a more powerful engine, but the IS-2 has better ground resistance, and so most of the time you do not really notice that that slightly lacking engine power. Two, the IS-2 has thicker front armour plate, has 120mm at the front instead of 90, but the IS-2 has better sloping on that armour plate, as you can see here, and so actually I have found the IS-2 to be a bouncier machine than the IS. So, in my experience, the IS-2 is like an IS, but better. Also, I've had ammo rack problems with the IS that I just haven't had on the IS-2, and my IS has safe storage maxed out. Anyway, so I think the IS-2 is just a better tank than the IS, in my experience. And so if you like the IS, you like that play style, you'll enjoy the IS-2. It's a very similar machine, just slightly better. This is the first heavy tank you have access to on the Chinese tech tree. It is not a bad machine. I think it is a good introduction to heavy tanks if you've not played any of the other heavy tank lines. And I think this sets up the rest of the Chinese heavy tank line to be pretty good. And by all accounts, well, some people argue about the tier 10, whether that's good or not, but by all accounts, only the tiers 7, 8 and 9 Chinese heavy tanks all seem to be pretty good. Am I keeping this? No, I'm not keeping it. Why am I not keeping it? Mainly because of the gun. The 120, it's a 122mm gun. It's not very reliable, and it drives me around the bend. Now, I didn't mind it as much on this tank as I have on some other machines, but I'd just rather play a T-29 or a Comet or something else at tier 7. If I were just going to jump into a tier 7 machine for the hell of it, I wouldn't jump into this. But I have had fun playing this. I've enjoyed myself. It's certainly not a bad machine. I do recommend it if you like to be up close and in your opponent's face. The Chinese heavy line is looking like it's going to be quite good fun. So there we go. I hope you guys enjoyed that review, or possibly even found it vaguely informative. If you did, please feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel, and I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao ciao.